presenter is Garrett Wee. Garrett grew up in Cottonwood, Minnesota, about 2.5 hours southwest of the Twin Cities. Garrett has always had a love for the outdoors, and he began birding when he was only 15. His obsession started when he found himself trying to identify a horde of shorebirds at the Cottonwood wastewater treatment ponds. Garrett attended college at Southwest Minnesota State University, where he double majored in environmental science and biology. Garrett now lives in Minneapolis, but still frequently birds Southwest Minnesota as well as the Twin Cities. Garrett is the chair of the MOU's Field Trips Committee, and he's put together an incredible agenda of trips for 2022. His first trip of the year was to his old stomping grounds, and his group witnessed over 50,000 migrating geese, including cackling, Ross's, snow, and greater white-fronted geese. Garrett's field trips are posted on the MOU's Facebook page and in the MOU's newsletter. Garrett will now tell us about spring migration in Southwest Minnesota's Prairie Pothole region.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. Well, those are some great presentations. I really enjoyed the sonogram. Learned a lot from that one. That was pretty cool. All right. So let's see. Let's get this pulled up here. Okay. Everyone kind of bear with me here. I have a laptop that's only 6 years old, but it's already kind of behind the times and a little bit slow. So, but yeah, so basically I'm going to be talking about spring migration through the kind of southwest region of Minnesota. And I'm going to kind of go through it as we would go through like a normal spring season. So we'll kind of start off early in February where there isn't much around, and then we'll kind of transition through the different, at least what I like to consider stages of migration that happen. So yeah, this is an aerial photo of my hometown that I grew up in. And so you can kind of see there's a couple lakes off in the distance, but otherwise it's a lot of farm fields, that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of great marshes and a lot of excellent places to bird in this region. So we'll get started. So Southwest Minnesota during late winter, there isn't much going on. It's pretty quiet. Pretty much all water's frozen. You're not going to find any waterfowl whatsoever. You may have some in the Minnesota River Valley, and there may be an occasional pond or lake that stays open, but otherwise, you're pretty much lucky to see a Canada goose, late winter in the southwest corner of the state. But as the days get longer, the snow kind of begins to clear off the ag fields. The sun gets stronger, the days get longer. And so you'll kind of start to notice mid-February, depending on the weather. In a typical year, you'll start, especially in mid-February, you'll start to notice the horn larks, snow buntings, Lapland longspurs are pretty much the only birds on the move, but they do become very abundant. And sometimes you can find hundreds and hundreds of these birds just lining the roadsides. Sometimes, it'll be negative 10, 15 degrees with the wind blowing at 20 miles an hour, and you'll still see these crazy birds trying to fly north. And so that's, kind of the very first stage of migration through southwest Minnesota. So, and then the next stage, typically in a normal year, once we get a little bit closer to March, we might have a couple days where we kind of get into the mid 30s. Maybe we'll hit 40 one day. And depending on how much snow is on the ground, if there isn't much snow, if you're lucky, you might see very, very small groups of primarily Canada geese migrating north, maybe 3, 4, you might catch them flying. Otherwise, At this point in the year, there's still very little going on. And obviously at this point in the year, weather is a big player in the migration. There are some years that, you know, we might have unseasonably warm temperatures at the end of February. We might be in the mid 40s, the 50s. And if there isn't much snow on the ground, you know, the waterfowl, they're going to take it full advantage of that, and they're going to move as far north as they possibly can, so long as the weather permits. And so ultimately their migration is internally driven by the photo period or like day length. But obviously at this point in the spring, you know, you're not going to see a lot of birds migrating north if it's 10 degrees outside and there's still 6 inches of snow on the ground. So as soon as that weather lets up, you know, you will see birds starting to move in. And so what I like to do if I'm in that area at this time of year, I will look for any open water that I can find, and chances are you may see some of the very earliest migrants coming in. And so this is a picture that I took this spring. There's a little open patch on the Minnesota River, and there were a couple mallards, some Canada geese, and then there were a pair of gadwall that had also decided to take advantage of the slight warming period and move north. So where can you find the open water at this time of year, you know, late February, very early March, when we haven't gotten a lot of that warm weather? A resource that I really love to use is called the Lake Aeration Program on MND in our website. So you can just Google search that. And then if you scroll down the page, there's actually an interactive map that shows where all of the aerated lakes are in Minnesota. And so there's quite a few around the Twin Cities area. And then a lot of them in the southwest corner. There's some in kind of every corner of the state. And so I really like to look at that map when I go out, and basically I'll just hop from lake to lake that has the aerators in it and just see what I can find. You know, most of the time I might have, you know, just a few trumpeter swans, maybe some Canada geese. But sometimes you can be quite surprised what waterfowl is just pig piling into the smallest little hole of open water. And so I've got the links down here as well for finding the aerated lakes. So kind of moving through the different stages. Once we kind of reach like a brief stint of warmer weather, you know, we might just barely be into the 40s. Some of the first local nesting like Canada geese begin to arrive. You know, you may see larger flocks of 15, 20, maybe a few mallards. You know, the golden eyes, the common mergansers start to come, but still relatively low activity coming through the southwest corner of the state. But typically around this time, the horn larks, the Lapland longspurs, and snow buntings are at their peak. You know, you may see hundreds, possibly even thousands. And so I've even had some days where, you know, I've seen upwards 4,000 Lapland longspurs moving through a single flock when it's just barely into the 30s. But again, it's all kind of driven with weather and then the amount of snow on the ground at this time of year. And so a little bit later, you know, just assuming we have a couple more days, maybe in the 30s, 40s, you know, maybe we have a one really warm day where it ramps up to maybe 50. And you'll see some species, you know, kind of might get a wild hair. You know, you might get a random flock of maybe 10 or 15 ringneck ducks that decide, hey, we're gonna fly as far north as we can because it's warm out today, or you know. But yeah, you'll definitely see a lot more Canada geese, more mallards, more golden eyes, and common mergansers. And so you'll even maybe see some solitary like red-winged blackbirds showing up around this time. And so, you know, this may be maybe the first weeks of March, you know, maybe the first week, maybe possibly even into the second, depending on what the weather is doing, and that kind of thing. So if the weather warms and there's no additional snow that falls on the ground, you know, we keep working towards, you know, warmer weather. You know, pond edges might start opening up if they're really shallow. You know, you might have a little bit of exposed mud flats. Ducks and geese will start using that. And you'll notice a lot more birds will be using the aerators. And so this is a picture that I took a couple of years ago, following a really warm day, and the aerator and the warm weather had kind of opened up a larger patch in the lake. And so I had picked up some first of year or foy waterfowl. You can see distantly there's some redheads and ringneck and mallards. And so we'll get more Canada geese, and then you'll be seeing larger flocks, you know, 100, maybe 200 per flock. And you'll start to notice that more cackling geese will start funneling in with the Canada geese about this time. And then there'll be a big push of common goldeneye and common mergansers. They seem to take advantage of any open water, and you may find dozens and dozens of them packed very tightly into the smallest little ice hole that they can find. And so about this time, you might start seeing other random species too of waterfowl that are kind of moving in. You know, you might get, you know, a stray, you know, pintail, or, you know, other gadwall, or that kind of thing. And you'll kind of start to notice that about this time that migration is starting to ramp up. You might pick up your first big flock of red-winged blackbirds that may have some common grackles and that kind of stuff in it. And so if we continue in the weather, let's see. So assuming that the warm weather continues, we get more south winds, the waterfowl is really going to take advantage of the favorable weather conditions. And so this was a picture I took a couple of years ago at Lac-Qui-Parle State Park, primarily Canada geese, but there were roughly 15 to 20,000 that were using the lake at this time. And so typically about this time, you'll notice things are starting to ramp up. You'll see a huge wave of Canada geese, and their numbers may be peaking about this time. You know, several hundred per flock, maybe even 1,000 moving overhead at one time. And at about this time, you'll also notice maybe some small flocks of greater white-fronted geese, maybe some snow geese, and then the cackling geese really peak about this time. So the cackling geese tend to migrate with the Canada geese. And so once you start seeing the larger flocks of Canada geese, it's typically good to look a little bit closer for the much smaller cackling goose as well. So moving in. And so this is probably my favorite, or one of my favorite stages of migration. And I kind of like to call it the white-fronted goose insanity. And it may only be a couple days following, you know, maybe a stretch of warm weather, a couple days with some south winds. And it can happen very, very quickly. So timing is very critical if you want to catch this portion of migration. You know, they can arrive in staggering numbers, and sometimes overnight. If there's south winds overnight, clear skies, nothing obstructing the migration, you can actually stand outside at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and you can hear waterfowl actually flying overhead, which is cool. You know, I've gotten pintail, gadwall, mallards, snow geese, that kind of thing, actually migrating through the night. And so you'll wake up the next day, you know, checking your favorite patch or whatever, and all of a sudden there'll be, you know, 1,000, 2,000 geese there, primarily white-fronted geese, and it's like, where did these come from? So that's really fun. And so typically about this time, the best times during the day to observe migration is anywhere from about 8 to 8:30 to about noon. So there's about a 4-hour window from 8 to noon where a lot of the birds are taking advantage of, favorable weather conditions. They're moving. I get a lot of skeins, and sometimes you'll get overlapping V's or skeins of geese, and they're kind of crossing. And so it can be a little disorienting and a little bit overwhelming at times if you hit a really good stretch of migration. And so about this time as well, you'll see the first killdeer are always arriving. It seems like they always follow the white-fronted geese in. You'll see the first ones. And then the red-winged blackbird numbers will skyrocket into the hundreds, possibly even into the thousands about this time. And so with that, the duck numbers also increase in diversity and numbers as well. And so it's typically about this stage in migration. It's getting there, but it's not at its peak yet. And so this is what I like to call the peak of waterfowl migration. I call it the I don't know where to look stage, because you could pick any random spot on a map and you could go stand there if you have a good migration day and look up, and there'll be horned larks moving, and then 100 feet above them you'll see a flock of redwings, and then maybe a quarter mile behind them you'll have a big flock of Canada geese, and then below them you'll have another flock of maybe 500 white-fronted geese moving. And so this is typically about the time when I like to schedule some waterfowl migration trips, because it's super fun, and you can just stand and look up, and there's just waves and waves and waves of geese, primarily geese moving over, but you get flocks of ducks. And so this can all happen very quickly as well, possibly a couple days after the first white-fronted geese move through. And so at this point, everything is on the move. You'll get Canada cackling, snow, white-fronted Ross's goose. And sometimes during this period as well, you can also get just pure flocks of Ross's geese. I know they're kind of a targeted species in Minnesota, so you can actually, if you get lucky, you may see flocks that don't have any snow geese, and you might see 20 or 30 Ross's geese flying over in a single flock. And so typically about this time, the marshes are starting to open up, and the lake aerators are really starting to expand. A lot more birds are moving in. They can use the water. The fields are basically vacant. There's no snow. So a lot of those geese and ducks can access any spilled grain in the fields to eat. And then also about this time, it's typically pretty easy in Southwest Minnesota to find 20 or more species of waterfowl, duck, goose, swan, in a day. Doesn't require a whole lot of effort. And so you may even get lucky and find some early blue-winged teal moving into the state as well. So this is my favorite time of, arguably my favorite time of migration throughout the entire year, because it's so life-giving, I guess, invigorating. Just a couple weeks prior to this, it may be a frozen wasteland, there might be hardly any birds around, but just 2 weeks later, the skies will be filled with birds moving north. Red-winged blackbirds are calling. Just a very refreshing time of year after the winter. And so I really look forward to this stage of waterfowl migration during the year. And so once the marshes kind of begin to open up, the lakes will start thawing out. And so already by this point, a lot of the goose numbers are starting to decrease. And so one rule of thumb that I kind of follow is that if the marshes are open, chances are the big push of goose migration is already past. And so it's a very fine line, and it's very, very careful timing to hit that peak goose migration. But as the goose numbers are dwindling, a lot more ducks begin to move in. And so especially during this time, a lot of the diving ducks tend to really increase in numbers. You can see flocks of hundreds and hundreds of canvasback, redhead, and sometimes scaup numbers will eclipse 1,000 on one single body of water. And so about this time, mallard and pintail may be peaking, but they might already be past their peak migration because they move so early in the year. Same with common goldeneye merganser. There are some other species that move very early in spring migration, but this is also a great time as we're kind of entering this stage right now. Presumably after this cold front that we get this weekend, but we'll be kind of getting into the more, I guess, duck stage of migration. And so this is the point in the year where we may see more of a transition from waterfowl to shorebirds moving in. You may catch some early yellowlegs, possibly some pectoral sandpiper moving in, and then killdeer numbers will also increase a lot. And also red-winged blackbirds typically tend to peak around the later third of March. And so if you want to catch some large cacophonies of red-winged blackbirds that can easily eclipse 4,000 or 5,000 birds in a single flock, you know, the end of March is a great time to go out and look. Oops, let's see. Whoops, went too far. All right, and so from April until May, the waterfowl tends to really drop off the numbers as far that you can find. And it may decrease to the local nesting Canada geese, you know, mallards, wood ducks, you know, maybe a couple gadwalls, some pintail that might nest in Southwest Minnesota, but primarily the more common duck species, and it'll taper off very fast in mid-April. But right about that time, we'll see a large surge of shorebirds now coming into the southwest corner of the state. So we get a lot of yellowlegs, pectoral sandpiper, marbled godwit will show up seemingly overnight, and American avocet also, you know, just to name a few. And so typically, you know, you look for those shallow marshes with exposed mudflats. You know, you may wake up one morning and suddenly be overwhelmed with shorebirds, and it's like, where did they come from? They're, you know, migrating through the night. And sometimes it can happen very quickly. And then typically through the end of April through May, the shorebirds dominate a lot of the marshes, assuming the habitat conditions are right. Whoops.
Hey, Bill, can you turn off screen share, please? And Garrett, you should be able to just reshare.
Okay, sounds good.
Bill is our next speaker, and he's ready ahead of time. So.
He is absolutely ready. Let's see.
And when you share, Garrett, it should just kick him off.
Okay. Oops. All right.
And just while you're doing this, your pictures are amazing. Susan and I have been trying to identify all the waterfowl in that one
Oh,
image.
thanks. Yeah.
Really fun.
Okay. Uh-oh. Now I got to go back. Oops, my apologies. Oh, I think I'm on the
top left where your PowerPoint is, I think.
Yeah, I gotta. Oops. Hopefully it loads. Okay. As you can see, I have a very speedy laptop. It's a little bit rugged, but it works. It gets the job done. Okay, so we'll go back, hopefully. Patience. Okay. Okay, there we go. All right. So, oops. So yeah, so basically the end of April through May, a lot of like the shorebirds will really dominate the marshes. Assuming that conditions are right, it's very conditional. If we get a lot of rain in April or even May, it can flood out a lot of marshes that would typically be good for shorebird migration, but it also may create other good opportunities in, for shorebirds in flooded fields or former prairie pothole areas that are now in plowed fields. Yeah, typically at this time of year, it's not too hard given the right location. You can find 20 or more species of shorebird at one single location. It can be very overwhelming at times. Typically, numbers can easily climb into the thousands. And it, even for me, this is probably another one of my favorite times of migration is just shorebirds, but that seeing that first time every year of walking up to a marsh and it has 500-600 shorebirds at it, and they're all intertwining and running around, it gets a little bit chaotic and overwhelming, but it's also a very fun time just to see so much life moving around and using that habitat. And so this is a picture from my probably one of my favorite locations to bird. There was one day I was scanning some shorebirds, and there was a flock of white-faced ibis that had actually flew through my scope and then flew out. So I had to pull my head away and look, and these ibis are circling the marsh. And so I was able to capture another few photos as they were coming in for their final landing. So they've got their landing gear out, and they're ready to feed on their migration. So where to look? So Southwest Minnesota is largely unexplored. Throughout the year, it doesn't get a whole lot of attention. And so I'll be giving a couple like good areas to look. However, this is just to name a few spots to check out, as there's tons and tons of great places to look for waterfowl and shorebirds. And so one place I really would recommend is good for shorebirds and waterfowl is Spellman and Mead Lakes waterfowl production area in WMA. There's also some walk-in accesses you can see to the south. And so it's just northwest of Cottonwood, maybe 5 or 6 miles, and then it's west of Hanley Falls, about 4 to 5 miles as well. And so I actually have the coordinates to this area in the lower left corner as well, just to get to some of these areas, because some of these places are off the beaten path and can be a little bit hard to find, but definitely well worth it once you arrive. This area is an old oxbow lake off the Yellow Medicine River. And so there's a lot of birds that will migrate up the Yellow Medicine River and end up using this series of lakes. And so there can be overwhelming numbers of red-winged blackbirds, waterfowl, shorebirds, that kind of thing. I've had glossy ibis here as well, and I believe it was 2017. So lots of great things using that area. So my favorite spot, I'm a little biased, is Lone Tree Lake. This was within my 5-mile radius of growing up, but I highly recommend it. It's great for waterfowl in the springtime. It ices out very early because it's fed by a creek that will basically overflow the lake in the springtime. And so Will probably be the first or one of the first lakes to completely ice out in the spring. When I led my waterfowl trip last weekend, the lake was completely ice free. And so we had, I'm trying to remember if we had, I think 15 or 16 duck species, and then we had 4 species of geese on the lake. And so typically once later in the spring, once the water level drops, the shorebirds will start piling into the lake, and more of the shoreline will be exposed. And so over the last 10 years, this lake has recorded 27 duck, goose, and swan species, and just over 30 species of shorebird as well. So I highly recommend it if you're in the area. A great spot to look. And there's also upland sandpiper that nest around the lake. So if all else fails, the lake's quiet, you can shut your car off and just listen for the upland sandpiper singing. And so just a quick couple other places, Black Rush Waterfowl Production Area next to Camden State Park. I like to call it a place where the unexpected becomes expected. A lot of great things nest here. Common gallinule. There's great-tailed grackle that's now on territory there. And a lot of great waterfowl here. And several hundred pairs of yellow-headed blackbird also nest here. And I've got the coordinates listed at the bottom. Another place is Lake Talcott, definitely underbirded. And this is straight north of Dundee, Minnesota. And so this is an excellent wildlife management area. And so a lot of ducks, geese, swans, and especially shorebirds will use Lake Talcott as well. And so thanks for listening. This is my contact information here with my email or my cell phone number. Please give me a call, shoot me an email. If you have any questions, I would love to help. If you guys ever plan on going out there, I would love to join you as well. And I can show you some areas that are good, and I can also provide very up-to-date information on some lakes, as we were kind of in a drought last summer, and so some lakes actually dried up last summer. So get a hold of me. I can provide up-to-date information on how the lakes are looking and that kind of stuff. So
Garrett, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of questions here. The first one is, are you doing any other field trips in this area this spring?
Yes. And so it's May 7th. Let me, we'll have it posted on the MOU site, but I believe it's May 7th, that weekend. I'm going to do my Western Minnesota Shorebirds trip. And so we'll meet in Cottonwood. And this is normally a very successful trip. We've done it for 3 years now, with the exception of 2020 with COVID. We obviously weren't leading trips, but the year prior, in the last couple of years, we've led it. And every year we've had at least one casual species to Minnesota and at least one rare regular found on this trip. And so a lot of potential for, snowy egret, cattle egret, white-faced ibis, great-tailed grackle. We stumbled upon a summer tanager one year as well. So there's a lot of great potential on that shorebird trip. So that'll be the first, actually, well, I think that's actually the second weekend of May, but it's the weekend of May 7th this year. Yep. Awesome.
What specific counties are in the Prairie Pothole region?
So there's a couple different maps that you can kind of look up. It's kind of a, you say tomato, I say tomato type thing, but primarily it's going to be Lac-qui-Parle, Yellow Medicine, Lion, Lincoln, Pipestone, Rock, Nobles, Cottonwood, Murray, Redwood, brown, basically from the Minnesota River down to, if you even want to go as far down to Mankato and just kind of draw a line straight down to the Iowa border, just that very corner of Southwest Minnesota. And so I do recommend on the DNR site as well, they have a recreational compass that you can look up that has a lot of wildlife management areas. They have all of that listed on their site, and you can just pan and look through all the different areas to bird, or areas that have potential to bird in that southwest corner of the state. So, yep.
So two more quick questions. Are we still in the I don't know where to look stage?
I would say yes. Things have been later this year. Seems like it's been a little slower to get going. And so I would say, definitely, if you plan on going out, I guess if you even have time tomorrow or anytime during this next week, I would say that it would be very good. And it may even be, you might be catching the post, but near peak of goose migration, but then large amounts of waterfowl moving in as well. So I would say, the next week, we're still going to be in the I don't know where to look stage. There's going to be a lot around for sure. So, yep.
Awesome. And last question, which is slightly off topic, but inquiring minds really want to know, and that is, what is the best shorebird spot in the Twin Cities?
Best shorebird spot in the Twin Cities. I've only been living in the Twin Cities for a year, but I was very impressed last spring. Correct me if I'm wrong, it's Rice Lake near Eden Prairie, and it's in the Minnesota River Valley. And that was one heck of a place. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, we had easily 20 species of shorebirds there. So if the water is low, you can look that area up on eBird, but yes, that's a very good spot. And the bass ponds actually aren't too bad as well. If the water level is low, there's can be a lot of birds moving through there. But I'm still kind of working on finding those areas in the Twin Cities, finding those good spots to look. So, yep.
Well, excellent. We will check back in with you on that, Garrett. Thank you so
Cool.
much for your
Thank you guys
this morning. Truly appreciate it.